Hey, Mike, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. I'm so excited to chat with you because, guys, I met Mike at the dinner series with Chris and Lori Harder. You are such a great speaker. As well, we're going to tell us all about what you do, so I expect that. But also, just such a great person to connect with. And I'll tell the story, but you literally inspired me to change my Instagram bio like on the spot while we were sitting there, and I haven't turned back since. So, Mike, could you just introduce yourself real quick for people listening?
I think I'll just be like, I'm the Instagram bio slayer, the slayer of boredom. But I work with people on communication. I help with storytelling and public speaking, whether that's on video or on screen. And my take on it is a little different than a lot of people who teach public speaking coaching, where you may have heard like, here's what you do with your hands, and here's the perfect outline to follow. All of these like tactics you go and learn. And for me, like from a very early age, I started to recognize that how we show up in a room, the choices we make with how our voice sounds, how we move, really impacts the meaning to the message as much to other people as it does ourselves as we're delivering it. And yet over and over and over, when I would see people teaching media training or how to be on camera, how to be interesting, they didn't address like, why do you sound the way you sound? And are there other options to you? Like what other keys are available in that piano of your voice? And why do you move the way you move? And how does that impact the message? And so I just got really curious about that. And I kept going further and further. I realized no one was really talking about this work that way. And yet we get on stage and we think, oh, my whole history didn't follow me. I'm just like a new being. Here I am to give a speech. How do I do it? And it's like, well, what did people tell you when you were 3 about your voice and how you should sound? Because that's probably coming up here as well. And so I work with people to help them really express themselves on stages, on screens, on podcasts, in Instagram bios, in a way that is that is engaging and fun and honest and makes people stop and pay attention.
Yeah, and it sounds, I mean, there's a statistic out there that says something like that public speaking is the number one fear behind death at some point. Like it was public speaking is such a fear because people think they're not naturally not good at it. And they also look at these speakers and they think that this is all natural, that this is all unintentional, that this is just instinctive movement, instinctive vocal pattern. And one thing I've learned from you and other folks who do something similar to what you do is that a lot of that is intentional and planned and actually backed by real data that says this is how you can actually compel people with these tiny little nuances, tiny little details that really do matter. What are some of those examples that you can give, Mike, for those listening on like, where can they pick up on some of these things now that maybe they missed before or just thought people were good at this stuff naturally?
Mm. Yeah, and I'm going to go back to the fear that we hear that like, oh,
Yeah.
public speaking is the biggest fear, that we say that all the time. And so I was really curious of like, is it really true? Like we're more scared
Yeah.
of that than like death or a shark eating us or something. And the reality is, and this happens so much with all of these things, is it's the most common fear. It
Yes.
doesn't mean that we fear it more than death. It just means more people fear it than others. So when you look at it,
Right.
it's like, oh, a lot of people fear it. Because I was like, really? Like you're more scared of that than
Yeah,
like,
I was interested in that too.
yeah. It's the most more people have that fear than have other fears, but it
Mm,
isn't like a leading fear for people, which is
right.
a, interesting thing. So the big things that I think we forget that we could tap into when we're getting again on a stage or a podcast, we're doing video, is that an audience who's listening to us or watching us is watching it through some kind of frame. So obviously on camera, we can choose the frame. I act much like a director does for like to an actor. I work like that with my clients. And so there's the frame of like what is actually in the camera and we can make choices there. But when we're on stage, an audience is watching us and there's a frame there. There's context. Is the room lit up? Is it darker? These are all clues that are tapping into the way that they're processing it. I mean, think about if we were hanging out and it's really, really hot outside and we're all exhausted, the kids didn't sleep last night, and then we're supposed to sit for a message. All of that context changes how we feel about the speaker. Then if we were in an air-conditioned room, we had plenty of sleep, we're caffeinated, we're loving life, that same speaker could deliver the same speech and it would feel very different because
Mhm.
we are never not in the full context. And so often we worry so much as speakers, communicators, podcasters, whatever, about the words we're going to say. And like, do I have the script right? Are the words right? And we forget that the way those words sound matters. We forget that how we move when we say those things matters. If you watch a Taylor Swift concert, a Beyonce concert, even, Rolling Stones, those people could just stand on stage and sing from one spot, but they move very intentionally to help land the message, because audiences also watch with their eyes, not just their ears. Because if it was just what's in the script, it's like, send me the PDF then. I don't need to fly here and see you
Right. I'll buy
sing.
the album. I don't need to buy $1,000
Yeah,
concert ticket.
I'll get the book. I already read the book. Why am I I'm like, people going to see Mel Robbins and it's like, well, I already read the book. Why am I here to see you? Because we're looking for something else, some connection, some truth. And so the big
Yeah.
thing I think for most people is realize that your voice can do a lot more than what you're letting it do. You can speed something up to make it funny. You can slow down. Like, think about this, even if you're listening or watching here. If I were to slow down my words like this, it sends a signal of, ooh, something important is happening. Something meaningful is happening.
You
Versus
lean
if I
in.
go
You're
up
like, what?
here. Yeah, exactly that. Versus when I go over here and I'm doing something like this, it's like, this is comedic or he's ranting. It is a different feeling that you have. And so if you're on stage and you want to cue us into how you want us to feel, then you can use your pacing, your volume, your proximity to us, like move closer to us when you're telling us something personal. But then maybe when you're trying to say that, you know, you felt distant from everyone for so long, you felt scared, you'll take a couple of steps back. And it's not like you're acting. You're not trying to do something where you stick up your hand and say, and in that moment I was fearful and I ran away. You don't have to get into that level of like dramatics, but those little cues of like walking forward a little bit, stepping backwards a little bit, all of those things can really dial up the words you're saying.
Yeah. And also the level you're playing on too, which I didn't realize was so important. I vividly remember your talk when you got on like one knee and you like leaned into the audience and you were talking about your childhood. So you literally framed it as little Mike, and then you like went down toward the floor, and I was like, oh my God, this is brilliant. And I was watching it and I was like, he brought us with him down. Like you kind of scaled your body down to the picture you wanted to paint. And it almost became like an animated visual of what you were saying.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that idea of audiences listen with their eyes as well. And so
Yeah.
me doing that, it's not me saying like, let me play little kid again and be like, hi everyone, I'm little Mike. But I'm down lower. I think there's a moment when I was talking about my teacher and I crouched down
Yes.
for her being in front of a desk. And it's just those little subtle things that make the whole picture then add up to the story you're telling. It all
Yeah.
adds up better then. And I just think we just don't. It's not even that people make bad choices when they get on stage or on a screen or something. It's that they don't know they could make other choices.
Well,
They're
they
not
say
even
surface
aware.
level. It's more superficial of staying with the vocal tone maybe, and the eye contact and general gestures, but I'll tell you, it's nerve-wracking. I've been in front of crowds before and I'm like, what do I do with my hands? And like, how do I walk
Yeah.
around? But I think it also has to connect to what you're saying and how much of it is message driven with story. Because I find that a lot of people are over educating or talking at or lecturing on the subject matter and not really engaging. Do you agree?
Yeah, this is one of the big things I see all the time is like, I
Mhm.
say often with clients, like, you are teaching way too dang much. And not that that's good or bad, but we do that also because that little kid who was 3,
Yeah.
4, 5, 7, 8, 9 was told what matters here is if you can pass, how do you spell cat? CAT. Good. There's only one way to do it. Get it right every time. So we think the most valuable, interesting thing about us is that I know 5 ways to have a better Instagram bio.
Yeah, we say that's
But
value. Like they say give value and everyone
yes,
thinks education.
yes. Yeah, we think bullet points and steps. But the reality is, if you start teaching me before you've created demand for that teaching, then it's all what I'm thinking as an audience member is, well, I think there's another, like she's telling me there's 3 ways to do your Instagram bio. I think there might be a 4th and a 5th. So I don't need this. Or I don't really even get why this matters. I've never seen this before. Who cares? But my job, if I'm going to say, hey, there's these 3 things you really need to do to have a stellar Instagram bio, my job first is to create demand for that, where you think, if only there was something I knew to change my Instagram bio. And I say, oh, I got 3 ideas for you. Let's talk about it. But I've created demand where you're like, ooh, I've never needed this thing before. And so the session you're talking about at dinner
Yeah.
series, that's what I was doing. I was talking about me. I went right into talking about me in 4th grade with my teacher having this stage presence. And then the next scene was me introducing myself to Shailene Johnson at a conference where I just was like, hi, my name is Mike and I do this. And I worked in a restaurant. And I also did this. And I did this one time. And one time I started a cat and I'm from San Diego. And when I grew up in San Diego, I did this. And blah. Anyway, nice to meet you. And you just saw her eyes be like, oh my gosh, do you want to take a picture together? And then like I didn't give her anything. So in then that moment, the next thing I did was to say, so don't do that to people. Want me to show you how? And at that point, you all are like, yes, because I've done what he just did. I always feel like I'm blurting out my whole life history when someone asks. And I want to be more like the teacher in the beginning with that stage presence who was so impactful. And so I didn't teach you anything until I got you to see, oh, I want that. Give me that. How do I get it? You know?
Yeah, you showed it instead of told it. So you brought people along to show the contrast. And then
Yeah,
people were enrolled in the idea of, oh, I want this, not that. Now they are subscribed to show me the how I get that. You have to build up the why, the what, and then the how.
exactly. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And
Yeah.
there's also an element in there too of especially when you're doing something that you uh, visibly, or we could look at the package and think like, oh, of course, this is easy for you. You're on stage. Lori Harder picked you to come and speak at her event, and you're here. When have you ever so I've included that thing of like, but I did the same thing a lot of you were doing when I walked up to
Mhm.
Shailene Johnson and I told her like, I was born in 1980. I'm a Taurus. I've got a like, I did the same thing. And so right now in this moment, yeah, I know how to put on a show, and I was probably always slightly like this, but I also didn't know how to meet people and didn't know how to tell my story. And so it's also a way to say, hey, don't discount what I'm about to teach you by saying, oh, easy for you, guy. Look at you up there. I wanted
Yeah.
to include that so people said, "Oh yeah, okay, well, cool. He had that problem too."
Yeah, it's that relatability factor because I
Yeah,
think when you can become disengaged with a teacher, a presenter, a speaker, when you go, cool, good for you, but I'm not like you, or I can't do that, or then that just disconnects, and then that throws a layer of but not me on everything the person says from that point forward.
yeah,
And I can't do that too. And then you kind of dismiss it. And I completely agree. I've been there before too, where I just go like, but you don't get it. You just don't
yeah,
get it. I mean, I'm in the accounting field, Mike. This is like, come on. It's like old white guys telling me, and I'm like, you have no idea
yeah,
what this experience is like. So it's you start discounting things based on you do judge like how people look, how they present, and the context of the situation, the full context of, like you said, Lori Harder picked you to present. Cool, you're really good at this. Why should I listen to you? Number one, and number two, why can I do what you do?
yeah,
Or how can I do
yeah,
what you do? Like you're just good at this. Like you're Mike, you have a personality. I can't do that. I'm not like Lori. I'm not like Mike. Cool. It doesn't matter.
yeah,
But you
yeah.
can approach those situations. I love that you brought that up. It's so important.
And we so often hear that bit about the like, hey, you're here. Why should I listen to you? What we
Hmm.
interpret that as often as the speaker, or even going on someone's podcast.
Credibility.
Why should you listen? We think, oh, I need to give them all my stats.
Yeah.
I have a MD from this school. I one time shook this one's hand, and it's like, but a lot of people have that. Like a lot of us have the same logos on our websites, like have spoken to this. What we want to hear is something right off the bat that says, oh, that person gets the thing I'm going through. Okay, cool. And then
Yeah.
we're interested when you later say, oh yeah, by the way, I wrote comedies and I did this. It's like, oh, of course he did. That makes sense. I get it now. But in
Yeah.
the beginning, that list of like credibility is no different than needing to like prove that you have worth there versus immediately just start talking and be helpful right away. And then I say, how did you learn all this? Oh, well, I went to college for comedy. Oh, you did? Of course you did. Now I get it.
Yeah.
But you
Connection over
sold me.
credential. Connection
Oh,
over credential.
ooh, this is
There you go.
that's a t-shirt.
But that was actually how when we did the podcast, you get pitch pages all the time as a podcaster, and you get these one-sheeters. And frankly, I don't think anybody does a podcast pitch well. I really haven't seen like a really good pitch that wasn't just a genuine connection in person or via DM or whatever.
Yeah.
These templated pitches and all that stuff. But I used to get these podcast pages, these one-sheeters, and they would have like these insane credentials. And I'm like, can you show me one video of the person talking like a human, like one video of them talking, showcase one of our application questions is show me a particular video that showcases your personality and how you are on camera. And there are people who just like sent me a blog or sent me something in writing or sent me something different. And I'm like, I'm sorry. I really don't care if you're the, let's say Dalai Lama. I would care, but I don't care what your credentials are if I cannot see you on camera speaking to anybody, and I don't know how you're going to be for my audience, because guess what? Your license or your diploma on the wall isn't going to translate through the microphone.
Yeah.
I really just want to know, are you going to connect with my audience and make them believe something new and learn something?
Yeah. And I would say the reason that you would even say that for the Dalai Lama is because even though it is the Dalai Lama, you've seen examples of, oh, this person
This
knows how
is
to
true.
deliver a good thing. So even
Yes.
there, the Dalai Lama is not the Dalai Lama, you know?
Yes, exactly. But it's all about like, how are you going to connect with my audience? And I really
Yeah.
barely even read. Sorry, guys. I barely even read the one sheeters because I'm going, cool, like, show me what you're like. Are we going to vibe? Are we going to have a good conversation? That's all I really care about, because good conversations are higher value to me than, any other lecture or any other thing that people can get off of ChatGPT, Google, or anything else to solve a problem. Like, let's have a real conversation.
And isn't
Yeah.
that's so interesting too, of like in this era of ChatGPT and AI, like we can go get the 5-step. You can have those AI tools build your social media plan for you, like write a speech for you. They could do all of those things. So like, what is the one thing that we still have? And it's this physical body expressing our ideas and story to people. That's
Exactly.
I think the unfair advantage going forward.
Yeah, I agree. And I want to talk about the role of storytelling too, because I think that one thing that we also have is experience that goes above and beyond what we have from things like ChatGPT or AI or even copywriters that we hire. We hire speech writers, we hire people like that, but we own our own stories. And I think that people underappreciate their own stories and the impact they can have. They think they're more boring than they are. Do you find that with your clients? They're like, I don't have any good stories, but like they have they have like possible movies in their own life stories, but they don't realize it.
Yeah, and I think the big challenge with that is that people they're thinking in autobiography. Okay, they're thinking in a biography. So like if we're reading someone's autobiography, it is typically the life story of someone. It is beginning to end. Of course, someone's choosing some scenes to highlight, but we're hearing,
Linear.
if I was reading the autobiography of Kelly Clarkson, we're going to start, maybe they'll tell it interestingly, but we're going to hear her whole life, right?
Yeah.
We as entrepreneurs, as people with podcasts, as people who are writing blogs or doing video or getting on stages, we need to think in memoir. So we could have 20 memoirs of our life, because your memoir is not your autobiography. A memoir is a specific argument you're trying to make, and then you build it around that. Like I'm working on one called The Daddy Issue. Okay. So this is about me becoming a father and saying, do we inherit the way we were parented? That's the argument I'm making. And so then I'm going to prove that. Now, in that book, I'm not talking about when I was 17 and worked at Pizza Hut. I'm not talking about being on stage at Second City in Chicago. I'm not talking about those things because they're not relevant. But I could do another book. I have another idea called Fresh Meat. And it's about me moving to Chicago when I was 20 years old and being new in the city and having these bright eyes, coming from the trailer park to the big city. So then all the stories around that are around that topic. As speakers, as communicators, as podcasters, and entrepreneurs going into meetings or networking, we need to think memoir, not autobiography. We need to think in smaller bits. And so one of the damaging things that I think has happened is there's this idea that like, I need to find my story. And it's like the one, like the one of the, which, like, what do you mean? Because there's this like gravity put to it of like, I need to get on stage and tell my story. And it's like, no, you need to get on stage or get on a podcast and you need to tell stories that are helpful to help the audience see what you want them to see. And so how do you take something that happened last week on Tuesday and turn that into a story, into a metaphor for something? And it doesn't have to be this like the story of how I arrived here in front of you. Unless there's a really great story about your Lyft ride to the hotel and it's relevant and metaphorical for something you're going to teach. Then it's interesting. And again, I go back to the dinner series that we were at and the story I opened with, which, and again, for the people that weren't there and didn't see it, I walked onto stage and immediately started in the story. I didn't say, today I'm going to discuss this. We've got 4 points. I just started and I said,
No.
the first time I came to Beverly Hills, I was 9 years old or 10 years old.
Yeah.
And we had done this school trip. And so that's what I started with because we were all in Beverly Hills at this property.
Right.
And that story is a little story about a teacher who made a difference. And it's metaphorical about stage presence and why we need it. It is not my life story. It is not my story. It is a story I use to teach, hey, stage presence matters. And everyone in the audience like, I have seen those people, whether it was a teacher, a coworker, a boss, a friend, who when they walk in the room, it's like, oh, pay attention to that one. We all had that then. So I used the story to teach that point, but I didn't tell my story. But we
No.
hear that all the time. Tell your story. And it's like, which one? Which one would you like?
But I think it's an illustration of a point as opposed to a story that drives the rest of the conversation. It's more about what point are you trying to make with your overall message? And then how can you infuse story? And the other thing too, I find, because this was something I struggled with when I was looking at how can I tell stories? How can I share more when I'm podcasting or training or doing speaking? And I realized that the biggest thing for me was I was trained to be super literal about stories. Like I need to find a client example where we did this and I empirical evidence that shows blah, 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 blah. And it's like, what about when you were a kid and this happened to you? And how can you connect that to your point that I'm talking about with business money? And believe it or not, you can. You can actually connect these things like, oh, you know how it feels when this happens to you or this happened to you as a kid? That's what it's like when we're talking about this. And drawing those parallels all the time. I think people are also very literal when it comes to story going, well, I haven't really experienced this literally in my life. You know, I'm just trying to illustrate this. And it's like, yeah, but there's probably a parallel. There's probably something else that people can glean the same emotion from that will put them in the right state of mind to make the point.
Yeah, I was on a call with a client earlier and we were talking about a launch she has coming up. So we were finding some stories she can use on social. And it's like a financial, thing that she's going to sell, some kind of like package there. And the idea basically is like, oh, you end up collecting all this stuff and you didn't even notice it because you didn't look. Like if you didn't look at your finances, you'd be like, oh, all these subscriptions. So I was talking about like, don't you have a lot of books on the side of your table? Like I know her. She's like, yeah. And I was like, that's what you do. You do a little video where you say like, today I was cleaning off and I noticed like I had 27 books sitting on this table. And I thought, what are these 27 books? Which ones have I read? Am I going to read any of them? And I started looking and I was like, ooh, this one's important. That one I can get rid of. This one's important. This is then you can connect it to, that's the same thing we need to do in your business. We need to check in and see where are things at? Where am I going? So there's all these metaphorical ways, parallels you were calling it, that we can still deliver the same idea. And so the big thing I think that's useful for people there is to say, okay, well, this is about why it's important to look at your finances monthly. Okay, cool. What else is it important to look at monthly? What else sneaks up on you that you're unaware of? Well, calories, steps on the treadmill, birthdays that you didn't. Cool. Make an exhaustive list of all the things that are also like that. And then see, is there anything in there that you're like, oh, actually, there was a one time I forgot my mom's birthday because there was so much on the list, I didn't even notice it. Cool. Run with that. See what you can do. Because those parallels and those metaphors help the audience see it. So what I always say, and this is one of the things I say all the time, is make a scene. Make a scene. Now, there's a subversive side to that. There's a double entendre of like, go be bold and expressive and use your voice. But there's also the idea of, if you're telling me, oh, Mike, the point I want to teach here is that we always need to have a good networking bit. We need to know how to tell someone our story in 90 seconds. I would say, cool, can you make that a scene? Put that into a situation for me. Okay, well, then I use the example when I vomited my life history onto Shailene Johnson. I could have just said, it's very important that we always know how to introduce ourselves to people because you may have interesting opportunities and you blow them because you sounded all over the place. And you guys are like, okay, yeah, sounds interesting. Me stumbling into a conference, like almost on top of Shailene Johnson and then blurting out my life history is much more memorable because then you think, oh my gosh, I've done that before too. Or you thought, oh my God, versus if I keep it theoretical. So if there's like a big thing there, it's like, make a scene. How would you put this? If I was filming it as a director, what are we putting in front of that camera so that we could show the audience it happening? And I think sometimes if we ask ourselves that, we can get out of case study land, which are the stories you were talking about of like, I have a client named Jane. Yeah.
It's like the theoretical problem versus the, oh my God, been there, feel that. That it's why those things resonate. It's like why memes resonate when you go like that feeling when, and you go, yeah, totally.
Yeah, it's exactly
versus
that.
telling you this is how you should feel.
Yeah, and like the other thing, like when an audience is listening, even on a podcast, but on stage, when someone's listening to you give a speech, they can't stop you and rewind like they can on a podcast or a video. They can't save it for later, watch later, and they can't stop reading and say, oh, hold on, wait a second. So this is, let me think about this for a minute. All they have is you in front of them. So if the math starts to get confusing in the argument you're making, if it starts to be so much information that I can't visually kind of place it, you've lost me. Versus if you start off and you say, when I was in fourth grade, we had this ramp that walked up to the classroom. Now you all are fourth grade. Okay, fourth grade, I'm imagining that. I can see it. I made a scene right off the bat to make it easy for you to put the information I was sharing inside of. often we don't do that, and we stay with all this information, and the audience is having like cognitive overload trying to track everything versus being able to place it somewhere. So like another little pro tip here with your storytelling, start with an ing word, start with some kind of verb. I'm walking up the ramp. I'm slamming the car door. I'm strolling across the street. I'm flipping open my phone. Remember flip phones? I'm flipping open my phone. I'm dating myself now.
That already plants the year, though. So you don't even have to say, like, it was 2002.
Hello. I'm tapping away on my BlackBerry. You know, it's like, oh my gosh, we get it. And so give us an ing verb and a location right off the bat, and you're already like 90 paces ahead of anyone else. The other reason that the ing thing helps is it forces you to get closer to when something is going to happen in the story, because we tend to start so far back of like, well, I was going to school in San Diego because, well, my mom moved to San Diego when I was 4. So now I'm 27 and I'm going to, and it's like, what? Who cares? But I toss my backpack into the seat next to me at the auditorium, and I watch the man walk in. And now we're like, okay, what's going to happen? So the ing, the verb, and the location automatically makes the audience think, oh, what's going to happen in this place? I gotta tune in, and that is engagement. That's what we want.
It's enrolling them in the story to be like, ooh, they're subscribed to know what's next. They're just continuously trying to follow along with the story, but not in an exhaustive way, which is what I really think is the key point there, is that you're not overloading their senses with like, how important are all these different facts he's telling me? Like, why does it matter if the window was slightly ajar? What's going to happen? Like, why does this matter? And if they're also, it's the gratification though, that if these facts don't end up mattering, then I get resentful because I'm just like, why did you tell me all this? None of this mattered. It wasn't relevant to the point. And now I'm tired from hearing the whole story.
And if you make it difficult to be an audience member for you, we just tune out. That's where we go to our phone. That's where we pretend we're on our iPad taking notes, but we're really just like, clicking through things. That's where we then start planning in our head of like my to-do list, because you've made it difficult to be an audience member, because like you're saying here, it's hard to keep track of everything. So now I'm like, does this matter? I remembered your mom's name the whole time. When are you going to use it?
Like we don't know the importance of each individual fact, so we don't know how much priority to assign to remembering those or where to put them in the permanent or temporary files. And now we're stuck with this clutter, and I'm like, I can't put all this on the bookshelf. I don't know what to do with all of this. This is so much stuff. And that's exactly how it feels. And to your point too, you have to bring them into the story, but like keep it to the relevant facts that are going to matter. It's just like a director in a movie, like you said, where all the scenes that fit together, like you never see the people eating dinner unless the conversation at dinner is relevant. Like you're not going to see them just eat breakfast and go about their day and be on the commute quietly, It's not relevant scenes.
They're just never in the car. This is one of the other things that happens when people are trying stories for podcasts and stages. They spend a lot of time telling you how they got somewhere. So I was leaving the house, and when I left the house, I grabbed my bag and we're driving. It's like 10 blocks to the place we're going. So we're driving in the car there, down the normal street we normally take. We pull in, we get a good parking spot. We walk in. It's like, why did I need to know? I know that you left your house and got there somehow. Just open the door, like be there.
Yeah,
and you never see that in a movie. You never see that in a movie where it's like, oh, they're just, if they're in the car, they're talking, or there's something going on with their face that they're telling us something. They're never just like in the car, like,
you don't see them in like, I watch NCIS. I'm like, you don't see them like, they pull up to the crime scene. I don't know how they got there. I don't know how they got there in 10 minutes. Like, how did this all happen? It's a TV show, and it's more about following the character journey, following the point, following the storyline and the plot than it is the little details. And I think that gets lost. And I recently had this experience, though, on a podcast. I was on an interview, and the host actually asked me almost 0 questions about what I knew, and almost all the questions about myself personally, my family, my history, my first job, all of these things. I left that interview feeling like, oh my God, that was the worst interview I've ever done. I got to share nothing about what I knew. I don't know if I'm going to get much, activity out of this. I don't know if anyone really cares about this stuff. It was the best performing podcast I had ever done. And I got 3 clients out of that. And I barely talked about the subject matter that I knew.
Yeah.
Barely scratched the surface of it. And I had to ask the question when they came to me and they enrolled as clients with me. I said, hey, what was it that compelled you to reach out? Like, what was it in the show? Was there something that I said or did that really kind of triggered you to reach out? And they said, the story about your dad, that story about your husband. The story about your first job. Like,
Yeah.
I really felt connected to you in that moment where I understood where you came from, and I trusted you because I
Yeah.
knew that you were going to take care of my business because I saw your spirit come through those stories. And I had not trained how to tell those stories. I hadn't really practiced those stories, but I told
Yeah.
them and people were connected to them. And I said, oh my God, I can't believe it took me this long to realize that people actually care.
Yeah.
That you're connecting to humans, not just your credentials. Because as a CPA, as an accountant, we were told and taught and nurtured into this behavior that you're as good as the certificates behind you. You know, you're as good as what you can teach people. You're as good as what you can save people in taxes. And
Mm,
that's your value. And
mm.
we have to shift that mindset.
Yeah. And the thing too is so often in those cases where we can just go anywhere and find, we Google search, I'm looking for someone, you can find all kinds of things. So then those stories become the way of like, oh, now I know a little bit about the way you think, the way you
Right.
process. I know what you value, and that's what I want. And these same things apply when I've done master classes on like job interviewing. I've worked with a couple of the Ivy League schools to help people get ready for going out after getting an MBA, because an MBA is a certification.
Right.
There's a lot of them though. Like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of them. Throw a quarter in New York City and you'll hit an MBA. Like, so how are you standing out? And one of the things I would talk about all the time is in those interview process, yes, of course, answer the question with like the thing you did, but make sure you're including why you did it that way. What went into the thinking? What you were weighing against, and even down to where you think, this issue came up and we had this on the table. And I remember this thing my grandma used to tell me. My grandma always said, always choose the most truthful option or something. I don't know. And in that moment when we had two ways to go and both would have been fine, we would have been covered. I chose option A because of what my grandma taught me. And so whenever I think about situations like this, I'm always filtering it that way. Now we know, oh, I know the way this guy thinks. I like the way he thinks. And
The
no
approach.
matter what issue comes up, he's gonna know it. Because if they're interviewing 10 people who all have an MBA from an Ivy League school, that is no longer the thing that alone is not going to make them say, ooh, you have an Ivy League school MBA. No, all 10 of you do. So now the only thing you've got is helping them see the filter in which you look through the world. And that is your story.
Exactly. That just gets you a ticket to the table. The MBA just gets you basically into the room, but what gets you the job is differentiating yourself among the other people who have the same credential.
Yeah, exactly that.
Exactly. Yeah, I say that all the time too, especially with interviews, because people think some people think they're more special than they are because they've been told, like, oh, I have an MBA from an Ivy League school. Yeah, you and all these other people. What else?
Right.
Because you're all interviewing for the same roles because you all have that credential. So now you've got an invitation to audition, if you will, for this or interview. So what are you bringing to the table that they don't? And people freeze up
Yep. All the time.
all the time because they don't know what makes them different.
And they've never thought about the value of that because we've been told, again, this goes back to what we were saying before, we've been told, oh, the most valuable thing you have are the things that you know. And it's like, well, what about when everyone knows that? Then what you have is how you filter the world, And it's the same thing we see like sneak into people with, I have a course called Magnetic Intro and Bio, and it's how to have a better intro for when you're being introduced on podcast or stage, and then also a bio, like a media bio written. And I talk about the fact when people say all the time things like, oh, Mike loves pumpkin spice lattes and corgis. And we put that in there to be like relatable, but like 80 million people a year probably buy pumpkin spice lattes. It's not that relatable. So take it and make it further and say something like, Mike Ganino is a blah, blah, blah. He's a keynote director. He's worked with people like Lori Harder and yada, yada, this and that and the other. And the night before pumpkin spice latte season launches, you can find him with a tent sleeping outside of Starbucks. So he's the first one in line to grab a latte. The corgi one, if it's like he loves corgi, who doesn't love a corgi? Come on, it's the cutest dog ever. So instead of that is to say, and Mike lives here, he he teaches this, he wrote this book, blah, blah, blah. And if you ever see him on the street and a cute little corgi comes running across your path, expect him to scream out, corgi, and grab his phone to take a selfie with a stranger's dog. Now we know, oh, he really loves a corgi. And then you think not only do I love corgis, you think, well, I don't love corgis, but I love pugs. He's my guy. That's so funny. Now it's relatable. Before, it's just a random fact.
Well, yeah, and even then, I'm a dog lover. I don't particularly have an emotion toward corgis, but I laugh at what you said because I'm like, I will pet a dog. I will risk my wrist. I will go pet your dog. I will ask permission, but I'm like, I will go try to pet your dog if I walk by it on the street. Like, we are stopping.
Right.
If there's a dog.
if I was doing that for you and your bio said like, and she does this, she's an expert, blah, 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 yada, yada, and she loves dogs. Okay. Like, are you evil that you don't? I would say
Yeah,
something
right.
like, and
Cruella de Vil is one without that bio.
yeah, if you're ever walking down the street with her, expect it to take 3 times as long as normal because she will stop and ask every single person with the dog if she could pet that dog. Boom.
See, that's great.
So much
That's
more fun.
great because I know there are tons of people who are like, "Yep, me too. Let's go for a walk."
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, going back to the whole point of this is it enhances that level of connection where
Mhm.
people can go, "Yeah, me too," or "Been there," or it's that emotional connection of experience and not just of the story and not just of the substance of it, but the actual experience of putting yourself in that position and going, "Yeah, I feel that."
Yeah.
I think
And
we're missing that a lot in how a lot of things are being presented.
and it gives you like a level of even like what we were saying about the interviewing and the people
Mhm.
interviewing saying, "Oh gosh, I loved you because of what you said on the show." This level of even like things in your bio, like the corgi thing or the coffee thing or the dog thing, it allows us, even if we're not those people, to say, I know someone like that, and I know people like that are good people. She's my people.
Right.
Even if you're not a dog lover, even if you're not someone who would drink a pumpkin spice latte, you think, I love someone that is that wild about a thing. That reminds me of my friend Carol. Oh, love Carol. So I love you too. You're getting points for things you
Yeah.
didn't actually do.
And even if they're not like, "Oh, me too," it's memorable because they'll
Yes.
remember that fact about you because no one else said it. Because I can tell you one thing, if I use that, Mike, what you just said, and I said the thing about the dogs, no other accountant is is putting that in their bios. There's like, it's their university degree, their certifications, their type of experience, blah, 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 snooze, snooze, probably on some Times New Roman light brown website. It's fine. But like,
Mhm.
what are you going to do that makes you actually stand out? And that doesn't have to mean a ton of drama, a ton of personality, like bright colors, crazy fonts, or anything like that. People go way too literal with
Mhm.
the drama or with what you were saying when it stand out. And it's like, or make a scene. I'm like, not literally. Paint the picture of what it's like to work with you or interact with you in a way that's really genuine and accurate, because
Yeah.
that's really what people are looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's again that idea of like the dog thing doesn't even mean, like you said, someone says like, "Oh, me too, I love dogs." But they're going to hear that and they're going to associate a bunch of other traits with you
Yes.
that are positive. And it's like, "Oh, great. I know that people who love dogs are generally good people. I love her. This is my kind of person."
Exactly. You mentioned that you have the course on the bio writing and things like that in the introduction. And I feel like I have disappointed our listeners so far by not explaining what you taught us at the dinner series a little bit and giving a taste of what that was. Would you mind if we wrap up with that kind of lesson on the bio and introduction? Because it was so, I mean, I have to tell you this too, like on the air. I have heard a bajillion people give advice on how to do a proper bio or how to do a one-liner or how to do an introduction, and I've worked it 38 million times probably. Like I have reworked mine so many times I can't even count, and I've never really fallen in love with how I say things because I go, it never really felt like me. It felt like a Mad Lib templated version of what people told me to put. And you had this really great way of quickly really extracting that essence of what it should be, and I want you to share that with our listeners a little bit more on the elements that you think are really essential to a really good introduction or bio.
Yeah. So we go to these events, right? And I'm going to meet people. I'm going to be in the room. I'm going to go to the networking thing. I'm going to go to the conference and I'm going to meet them. And then we're told that the way to do that is to do like I help so-and-so's get a such and such statement. I
Mm-hmm.
help visionary entrepreneurs lead the life they love. And sometimes we use flowery language like that. And it's like, I don't even know what that means. And
Yeah.
then we also might do something like I help expert coaches make more money online. Cool. That's clear. That's clear what you do. But I often am not going to hear someone. If you want me to refer you to someone, I need to remember you. If I meet 100 people that night and it's all some version of I help visionary leaders wander into the woods and find their soul, or even I help coaches make more money online, I need it in language that the person might be complaining about. Because like
Help me
when I meet my
help
friends,
me detect the problem. Help me detect
exactly.
the problem so I can prescribe you.
Yeah. So make it easy for me to say, oh, I'm standing with someone, a friend, and they're like, "Oh gosh, I'm really struggling because I'm doing all of these things with marketing. We're spending money on Facebook ads. We're doing that. And like none of it is making a difference. And I just don't know what to do." Oh my gosh, I met someone last week who does exactly that. I wouldn't think I help experts make money online. I wouldn't think of that. I would think of the specific problem the person in front of me is talking about. So how can you put it in a scene? So what I would say, instead of introducing is, I help so-and-so's do such and such, I would try to think of what is an example of that happening so that you can say it to me. So, hey, so nice to meet you. What do you do? We know there's so many people out there who are starting businesses and they're selling courses and coaching online, and they're told, go do Facebook ads, go do this, go do that. But none of it is really working. And they're running around trying all these things and losing money and time. I help them stop do that. Okay, that's one way, much cleaner, much tighter. You can also put it into a situation. So if you said that to me, hey, Mike, what do you do? You know how you sometimes go to conferences and you sit back and you think, this is going to be the most boring thing I've ever experienced in my life. And then it is, because the person on stage paces neurotically. They have a million bullet points. At one point, they probably tell you like, hey, I know you can't see my bullet points. I'll just read them to you. And in that moment, you wish you were anywhere else but that room. I help people not give speeches like that. That you're going to remember versus like, I'm a public speaking coach. Okay, cool. Thank you so much. That
Right.
specific thing triggers you to think of, I was in a situation like that. I've met someone like that. And when I introduce myself like that, Shannon, all the time I hear, oh my God, I need to introduce you to my friend Scott. Oh my God, you need to talk to my boss. Or I hear, ooh, I really don't want to do that to the audience. How do you help people? And it is so different than, I'm a public speaking coach.
Exactly, because you're not prescribing the who needs a public speaking coach.
Right.
And that's the element that's missing is I help so-and-sos do this, but how do people identify those so-and-sos? How do people point out the people with the problem and go, oh, you need Mike. You need to go talk to Mike. That is so important because and ever since then, I've really honed it in on, I still use the I help a little bit where like, most business owners don't pay themselves enough and really don't have a grip on their cash flow of what's going in and out and are making decisions on the fly based on emotion. I help them not do that by making decisions back with data without it being super dry and hard to understand.
Love it.
So that has shifted that, and like, oh yeah, people don't pay themselves enough. And most of the time when I started saying that, people were like, I need you.
Yeah.
People go, oh my God, that's me. Or, oh my God, you need to go talk to somebody I know is looking for an accountant, but that's what because if I try to compare it to being an accountant, it's like, she can do my taxes. It's like, no, that's not what I do. That's not what I'm here to solve for. Like most accountants keep you out of trouble. We're going to help you grow. And that's the difference is like, we're not just here to keep you out of trouble. We want you to thrive, not just hit the minimum to stay out of jail.
Yeah. And the thing that you did there is you also made them not, you make the people in front of you who are like ideal clients for you, you make them not associate with an identity that is scary to do for their status. So if you had said, oh, I help leaders or I help coaches who aren't, keeping enough of their money figured out. And it's like, well, that's not me. I'm not going to raise my hand and say that's me.
I'm not going to admit that that's me.
I'm not going to admit that because these rooms, these places we go, there's a lot of status versus saying, most entrepreneurs don't pay themselves enough. And I'm like, yep, that's me. And so what I help them do is do this. They're like, oh, cool. Help me do that. But the other one, there's have to associate with broken identity. Yeah.
There's no shame associated with this, with belonging to that identity. So that's what I realize is that most entrepreneurs have this problem and no one will ever admit out loud they have that problem.
Yeah.
They don't even know they have that problem necessarily. A lot of people in my field are symptom aware, not problem aware. So I'm running out of money or I don't pay myself enough is how they feel. But I'm like, I know what that really is, but I'm not going to tell you that because that's not what you're experiencing. What you're experiencing is I don't really know, I don't really know how to manage my money well, or I don't know how to pay myself more. I need to be taking home more of what I make. And I help you do that. Don't worry about how.
Yeah.
I help that outcome.
What you did there so beautifully is you put it in a scene right away. You made it a scene right away. Most entrepreneurs don't pay themselves enough. Oh, yeah. Okay, I get it. Yeah, that's that. I agree with that.
True.
I would like to get more. So right away, you give us a situation, which is always going to be symptoms, because that's what we can film. I can film an entrepreneur like, oh, I wish I was paying myself more. I can film them saying that. I can't film the other stuff. And so right away, you give me as an audience member something to think of. It's the same reason for mine that I said, because you could look back and say, well, Mike, you said boring people on stage. And I said, you were bored in the audience on stage. So I didn't make the person associate and say, I didn't say, you know how sometimes you're on stage speaking and you realize that you're just boring everyone out of their mind? I didn't make anyone say, oh yeah, that's me. What I said is, have you ever sat in an audience and been like, this is a snooze fest. I can't wait to get out of this room because the person on stage was doing this. And they're like, I have seen that before. And I definitely don't want to do that. So let me get help. But I'm not
Like,
making
I don't want to
them
be
say,
that person, because
Exactly.
now you're relating to the audience and going, even if you're the speaker who's listening to you say that, and you go, I don't want to do that to people. I've
Yes.
been there. I don't want to be that person. How do I not be that person? I want to make sure they're having a good time because I want that experience for them. It's all about creating that experience and painting that picture. And like you said, now that I realize that when I'm talking about my like pay yourself more, there isn't any, like, most entrepreneurs are, effing up this, that, and the other thing. It's like, I'm not blaming anyone. No one did
Right.
anything wrong. It's saying you should be paying yourself more. It's like,
Yeah.
you should be. It's more philosophical of like, we believe you should earn more money and we're going to help you do that. And that's really what it has to come down to, is like the philosophical enrollment and the idea that, like, yes, I believe that is good. I want that thing, as
Hmm.
opposed to you're doing something bad and I need to make sure you don't do that again.
Yeah. It's like, I deserve it. I deserve that.
Yeah, I deserve
You know?
this.
Yeah.
I love
I
that for
love it.
me.
I love that for me.
Mike, I could chat with you all day. I absolutely love chatting with you. But would you mind just telling our listeners where they can find out more about how they can learn from you and maybe even experience something that you're doing for coaches and speakers?
Yeah. Everything, once you figure out how to spell Ganino, which is Ganino, Mike Ganino is the one. If you put that into Google, I'll be the one that shows up. It's a good thing about the name like that. But you can go to MikeGanino.com and learn about all kinds of things. And then specifically MikeGanino.com/storycraft. There's a free workbook. It's got like the 5 stories as entrepreneurs that you should be able to tell and how to think about them differently, with some prompts for you to think differently about how to tell those stories. So that's over there, totally free, that you can go grab and start working on those stories.
Guys, download that immediately. I'm going to head over there myself. This is such good stuff. Mike has a great way, and if you can't tell by now, after a few minutes to listening to him, is you have a great way of expressing those things and enrolling people in those stories and really making us aware of how our actions, our behaviors, and our like subtle details really do make a difference in how the world sees us and how we can get results for our own businesses and in our life. So thank you so much for unpacking all of that today with us.
Thanks for having me.